And we do have some reaction from someone here locally, right, Dan?
Right. Let's go to Tung Yin. He's a professor at the law school at Lewis and Clark College. And I've met him many times. Tung, can we talk a little bit about what's going to happen next? The judge to the jury has to come back. What is that next phase?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. So the next phase would be sentencing. And typically you would have some time between the verdict and sentencing so that there can be a pre-sentence report prepared. So that would look at not just the circumstance of the crime, but possibly get more background details on the defendant that would be relevant for sentencing purposes. And then you'd have the sentencing hearing, and then the conviction would be, the judgment would be issued, and then the defendant could, of course, appeal the conviction to the Oregon Court of Appeals.
Tung, this was a pretty rapid decision by the jury. They deliberated for about a day, maybe a day and a half. Are you surprised by that since there were 12 counts, or does that not surprise you?
Well, I guess, considering the circumstances, obviously it was not tried as a capital case because of the new Oregon law, but still murder is the most serious crime that we have in the state. So in that sense, a fast verdict, and I think a day or so of deliberating would be a fast verdict, is a little bit surprising. But, you have 12 verdicts, or 12 counts, but they're really grouped into multiples of the same type of crime. So there's multiple intimidation counts, there's multiple first-degree murder counts, right? So if they decided that he had intimidated the one victim, it probably wasn't that hard to decide that, well, it was all of them. In other words, it's sort of an all or nothing on each of the types of crimes.
And kind of in that same vein, was it surprising at all then that the jury didn't even consider any of those amended or lesser charges? When it comes to the two murder charges?
Well, on the lesser ones, that would simply go to what they thought of his state of mind. So I think since the evidence of the fact that there were the homicides, I think is fairly quite strong. And so really the case came down to, on those homicide charges, what did the jury think was his mental state, his intent? Was it intent to kill? Was it mitigated by some kind of provocation or other sort of potential disturbance? But coming back as they did, I think that means that they rejected the defense's evidence of provocation and mental disturbance and concluded that he indeed had the capacity to and did form the intent to kill.
So all of these are Measure 11 crimes, or at least the major ones are. Is there any wiggle room here in the sentencing? It's life, right? I am trying to envision a scenario where he gets something less.
I think that's right.
And Tung, how important was the video evidence? I mean, we had overwhelming video evidence that we weren't aware of even until this trial started. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's so video evidence, especially, it's kind of hard to believe it's been 20 years since the show CSI first aired, but there have been academics who've written on the actual effect in the real world of that show and others like it, and how juries have become more, maybe sophisticated, certainly more demanding in terms of the quality of evidence. And so I think when you have video evidence, it's one thing to have a witness testify. I was there, I saw this, and you have to make judgments about, do we think the witness is credible and believable? But when you have video evidence, the jury is actually there. They get to see the scene, and that, whatever's on the video. You don't have to rely on the narrative of the person describing it.
And I think to that point, and whether, Tung, you can speak to this or not, it's important to note that video is some of the most graphic video that I think a lot of people have ever seen. So if you are in that courtroom or if you're on that jury, it's very difficult. I mean, you sign up to do a job, and that is something that some of us have to do at some point in our lives, but that, they really need to take some time probably after this and really digest a lot of that, because what they saw was pretty heinous.
Yeah, definitely. And, there's sort of obviously the people who were on that car on that day suffered incredible trauma, whether they were the actual victims or just happened to be there. But there is also the derivative trauma of in this case, having to sit through and really grasp that video. That can also traumatize the people who have to endure that.
Professor, I want to talk about Jeremy Christian's mental health. When I'm out in the world or talking to people I know, they usually say to me, well, clearly he was mentally ill. Can you address how that was not his defense, or that was not all of his defense, and where the line is between being responsible for your actions and not responsible for your actions?
Yeah, usual caveat here. I am definitely not a mental health expert, so I can't speak to the specifics of whether somebody is or is not, or even the symptoms and so on. But in terms of the legal standard, there's two things that we're concerned about in terms of mental competency. So one of them is whether the defendant is competent to stand trial, and that would mean today, not necessarily when the alleged crime occurred, but today at the trial. Is the defendant in a position where they're actually able to help the defense? Because the defense lawyer is doing the lawyer's stuff, but obviously the lawyer is going to be relying on the client to help out in terms of describing the client's perspective of what happened, possibly avenues of defense evidence, and so on. If the defendant is not in a position to understand the nature of the charges or what the proceeding is about, then we can't have the trial because the defense is hobbled in that sense. So that's one thing that we're concerned about. Some types of mental illness would clearly impact the ability of the person to understand what's happening. But the question the judge is asking is not, does this person suffer from XYZ mental illness, but simply, do I believe this person is competent to stand trial? And then the second question is, at the time that the defendant committed the crime, since almost all of our crimes have the mental state, whether it was intent to kill or, some other crimes might be recklessness and so on. These are all defined standards, but whether the defendant essentially intended to do what it is that they did. So again, somebody who's suffering from some types of mental illness may simply lack the capacity to form that intent. And so that, again, is what the judge would have to be determining. And then some states would treat that as either not guilty by reason of insanity or they might call it guilty by reason of insanity. But either way, if the defendant is unable to, at the time of the crime, was unable to appreciate to form the intention to commit the act, we wouldn't convict the person, convict and punish the person, but they may end up being remanded for involuntary confinement and treatment.
All right, Professor Tung, thank you very much for spending time with us. Professor of Law at Lewis and Clark, putting your perspective on this afternoon. Once again, Jeremy Christian found guilty on all 12 counts